this is kind of the rough schedule, the rough class schedule I put together. So this is on the syllabus link on the website. I'm going to replicate most of this stuff into the Blackboard system as well, and then also update the slides with it. I will say that this is based on the schedule I used last semester, or last class. I will say that this one, we won't necessarily hold hard and fast to this. The original schedule I didn't hold hard and fast to on the previous time I taught this class. I will kind of be flexible to what the folks in the class need. You know, for instance, let's see, if this week ends up being something where there's a lot of engagement, there's also a lot of interest in, say, going deeper into that topic, then I might shorten this one or shorten this one, or even move these down and then shorten something down here. So to accommodate things like that, and also possibly add in some, like, you know, current events type of stuff to it, I do have a couple of weeks where I have additional topics to be determined. So, like, great example would be that some of you probably read about that Intel CPU bug that came out last month. As actually, I think, revealed in October and November in secret to a handful of interested parties. They spent a long time trying to fix it. Or I should say, trying to fix operating systems and fix software packages to accommodate for the bug that was not fixable in hardware. So things like that happen all the time. I do like to have an opportunity to try and incorporate some of that stuff into class if I feel it's relevant. Scoring rubric. I'm not going to have a whole bunch of testable material in the class, so there isn't. I've gone through a handful of malware analysis books. I think I've gone through like 4 or 5 of them or whatever. I haven't really found any that work really good as like a textbook for a full class. Many of the ones out there, I'll say that like, I'll just say the content that I'll teach in this class is pulling from like maybe 4 or 5 books. So I don't expect anyone to go out and buy the books, although they are very useful if you already have them or have access to them. Because of that, I'm not going to be doing, you know, midterm exams or final exams and stuff like that. Instead, I'll be doing projects, so they'll be kind of like lab projects. So some of you who take in like Dr. Franco's course in network security, or take in cyber defense overview or software vulnerability assessment, the labs that he gave, that level of material is probably similar to what I'll give. There's 16 weeks of class if you include the finals week, so 15 weeks of class if you don't. I'm probably going to have about 8 project assignments. You get roughly 2 weeks for each of them, although a few of them may overlap. So I might give like, you know, I might give 2 of them, and then, you know, they'll both be due within a span of 3 weeks or something like that. But I will never do the thing where I give a project on, say, a Thursday, and I expect it to be done the next Thursday. I won't do something like that. You'll always get at least 2 weeks from when I put a project up. I also am not going to make any commitment to put projects up ahead of time. You might, if you went and visited the class stuff early, you might have seen this. This is an example of what I gave out last year. This is not the same assignments that I'm going to give out this year, although I may pick and pull from some of these you know, useful material for this year. So also, if you decided to jump in and do all these ahead of time, it's very good for educating yourself. I won't accept any of these submitted in lieu of some other assignment, unless I specifically say so. And then on top of that, I do recognize that everyone in the class probably has varying levels of expertise in programming, assembly language, embedded systems, even cybersecurity. So it's kind of up to everyone in the class to try and, you know, take whatever means are necessary to bring themselves up to speed with a proficiency in at least like Python and writing proficiency in Python, so you can write a Python program by hand, like on your own. C, simple C programs. I'm not going to expect you to write anything in C that's, that requires more than, 100 lines of code or something. If that. Reading C, on the other hand, will be very helpful. So if you don't know how to read C code, you should learn how to read it. Also, assembly language, I'm going to dedicate some class time, as I mentioned, up here. Where do I have it? Actually, this schedule's in reverse. So somewhere around here I have, yeah. So I have, I gave 2 weeks for assembly language last semester, because that just happened to be what, what was beneficial to everyone. Let me see if I can go over here. I've got it compressed down to a single week this semester. Just that was my original intent last semester, but as I said, if it takes more, then it takes more. I don't expect this class to be a complete replacement for assembly language. Generally, I'd say that probably half the assignments that you're gonna do require some proficiency in reading assembly language, not necessarily a huge proficiency in being able to write it from hand or anything, which is what you typically need from the perspective of a, actual assembly language class or an embedded systems class or something like that. So, I'll teach kind of the basics, the mathematical operations, the basic concept of how memory storage works and stuff like that in assembly language. And then the big one is going to be how the bytes themselves, the byte values, are actually translated into instructions. That's, I think, the key piece that makes a lot of difference in malware analysis. Whereas the instruction and mnemonics are very useful for writing assembly and doing, embedded systems and building algorithms from assembly. Analyzing them, the mnemonics aren't quite as important as the byte values themselves and the structure with the byte structure. So the other thing too that I will add, let me see, is this one, and we'll get into the kind of lab environment stuff like that in the next lecture on Thursday, because number one, I don't even think I can run a virtual machine on this computer here. But basically, to do malware analysis, you're going to want to have like a dedicated system for it. Most of the people that I work with, they have a VirtualBox, like virtual environment on their laptop or on their desktop or something like that. So you'll want to go to, like, this down here. So a great one is this. You don't necessarily have to use it. It's entirely possible that we have some sort of license to let you use VMware or something like that. I don't know. I use VirtualBox myself exclusively. So if you do have questions about how to do something in VMware, I won't understand what you're talking about, and I'm sorry for that. But if you do have questions about using VirtualBox or something, I may actually be able to help you. It's free, open source. That's one of the key things that I like about it, is that since it's open source, it means that I can actually analyze what's going on under the hood, so it's very good from a research perspective. As far as I can tell, it has about as many features as VMware does, even a little bit more on the command line than what VMware's command line interface allows you to do. So the other benefit of VirtualBox is that if you already know how to do scripts and automate things from the command line, then everything you can do through the user interface in VirtualBox is doable from the command line in VirtualBox as well, and more. So definitely try getting this running on the, try getting this running on the laptop, and then that's fine. Yeah, you should be able to use VMware It's just that some of the installation instructions might be different with VMware for getting the images on there. But if you have VMware, my expectation is you've probably been using it already, right? So, yeah, I don't know. That's like, there's, 3 or 4 major operating systems I could have on my desktop, and I can only tell you how to do things in 1 or 2 of them. So, So, let's see. So, then I'll just go back to the syllabus. So the other thing too is the online course. So some of you came in late. So I'll repeat this. The course is actually done in an online format. So basically that means there's a camera up there, and the people who are on the remote site can actually see the classroom. They can hear what I'm saying. I don't think that they can hear what's happening in the crowd, except that if there's a lot of noise in the crowd, that definitely gets picked up by the mic that's right here, and can cause background noise. So, just be aware that you have remote students attending that you can't see. Those of you who are remote, if you're logged in via WebEx or something like that, you may just want to use the chat feature. Basically, if you have a question or something like that. I'm not entirely certain what sort of kind of raising your hand or interjecting mechanisms there are in WebEx, because though I've used it, I haven't used it extensively. But I'll try and keep my eye on the chat window to try and see if anyone has a question. But as I also said earlier, those of you who are logged in via chat or logged in via WebEx, there's a private option in WebEx, but there's no private screen here. So if you do have a private message or something like that, it's best to email me or figure out some other method of communication, because even if you intend for it to be private, it's going to pop up on the screen here. So just keep that in mind. Yeah. So that said, yeah. 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 Yeah, so I was going to get to that too. So I actually do have some lecture slides put together for this class. But yeah, the question was that for VirtualBox, if we're going to have virtual images and everything, I am going to provide you all with virtual images that you can use. So you won't be required to build your own operating system up from scratch and all that stuff. There are 2, let me see if I actually have them in here. I'm trying to see if I don't talk about them in here too much. I think they're in the next class, or they're in the next session. But so there's a handful of Linux distributions out there that are very common for penetration testers and malware analysis folks specifically. One of them, I think called Remnix, doesn't always tend to keep up with the latest version of a lot of pieces of software. The other one, Kali, doesn't tend to have a lot of malware analysis stuff installed on it. So in the past, what I ended up doing was I provided a version of Kali Linux, which has a lot of the pen testing stuff, a lot of the attack creation stuff on it. And then I put on a whole bunch of malware analysis tools onto that version of the software, and then I just hosted that image. And what I'll end up doing is I'll host a VirtualBox open, what's it called? I don't know. VirtualBox appliance file, an OVA file that you can download. So for the VMware users, I will try and see if I can find any information on how to also make that work in VMware. I don't know if there's a conversion between the two or not. But worst case scenario, I believe that it'll also be available as a VDI, which is or VMDK. And you can use the VMDK file in VMware and then give it very specific architecture settings in the configuration, and it'll let you basically boot off of it. But yeah, I will provide you with that, and then I'll also provide you with some Windows images as well that come from actually I can just show you the site. So Microsoft actually provides you, this might be new and helpful information to you, but Microsoft actually provides you with a whole bunch of, whole bunch of ways to download virtual images of their Windows software with a whole bunch of different Internet Explorer versions installed on it. So Microsoft's kind of approach with this is that if they provide you with all of these things, then they give you the ability to make web applications that can run in all the different versions of IE without having to buy like 7 different computers or something and configure them all yourself. However, anyone is free to use them for whatever reason you need to. They expire after 90 days, which should be right at the end of the course. So that's very convenient for us as well. So what I will do is I'll also be pulling some of these, and I won't be pulling all of them. I'll just be pulling maybe 1 or 2, and then doing the same thing. I'll make an OVA and a VMDK file, which is basically the VirtualBox image out of it with some pre-configured settings in it as well. However, if you're so enterprising, feel free to explore it yourself and and set up your own virtual machines. The intent behind that I'll get into in a second, though. So here's a little bit about me. We'll get into the slide deck now. I'm a PhD candidate in the computer science engineering program here. I have a focus in cyber operations. So I've been contributing content to a lot of the cyber courses. So some of you who have taken other cybersecurity courses up to now, you may have had some of the material that I put into those courses. I work during the day at GE Aviation. My employer is gracious enough to give me enough flex time to be able to also teach this class. It's very helpful to them, very helpful to all of you, and also I don't always get to choose when I get to work. So, I'll probably have something to work on when I go home tonight after class too. So that's another reason for flex time. As I said, office hours, I updated this. So this, what's on the slides is, is fact for this semester. Easiest for me is after the Tuesday class. So I should generally have like available time after the Tuesday class until like 7 or 8 o'clock or something. Kind of my research focus is on malware analysis, so disassembly level, machine code translation, stuff like that, machine code analysis. The other thing, I'm an organizer for the B-Side Cincinnati Security Conference, which is coming up May 12th in Cincinnati, actually over in Oakley. So if any of you are interested in that, I've had some of the previous students who went to it said they really appreciated it. It'll be attended by other security folks in the area, as well as people who are employers in the area too, and possibly some employers from outside the area as well. So, and before we jump into that stuff, I'll just also add that, do I have a slide on that? Yeah, here we go, never mind. I don't have to add it because it's actually in the deck. Let me move this out of the way. So, this class is called Malware Analysis. Generally speaking, everyone kind of has a feeling of what they think malware is, but I always find that it's important to give very good or specific definitions, or maybe even just kind of public definitions for all the things that we're going to talk about because a lot of people have their own different ideas of what is malware and what is not malware and everything. So for the purposes of this class, I'm going to give it this definition. Malware is any unwanted software or code in a system that's intended to perform unauthorized actions on that system. So software or code, that can be your executable programs, that could be an application that gets installed. It could also be files that cause controlled code execution to occur. So, somebody tells you to install a new chat program, and that new chat program's actually stealing your contact list or something like that. That's malware. But also, like somebody gives you a spreadsheet that they attach to an email, and that spreadsheet has a VirtualBasic macro built into it that's designed to maybe steal some information that Microsoft Office has access to, or maybe redirect, give you a link to try and visit a malicious website or something like that. That spreadsheet is also a type of malware, even though maybe some people may not necessarily categorize all these things that way. So that kind of difference of opinion is why I'm kind of grounding the definition here with what malware is. So there's a lot of objectives for malware. This kind of fits in with the whole, lots of different ideas that people have for what malware is and is not. I'm just giving myself a quick time check. Okay. I'm not going to have an exhaustive list here because every time someone comes up with a new way to basically financially benefit from someone else's misfortune, they come up with a way to turn that into malware a lot of times. Really great example, which I'll throw in there that isn't on the list because this didn't exist back when I first wrote this, is what's real popular now is people writing JavaScript code that's supposed to be embedded in websites. And that JavaScript code basically does cryptocurrency mining. So while you're watching that website, your processor and maybe the 100,000 other processors that are also viewing that website, or maybe a website that had that advertisement in it, are all basically wasting electricity trying to mine cryptocurrency for someone. This is generally categorized as a form of malware because it's a form of theft. You didn't ask anybody if you could use their use their power grid or their internet connection to do this. That's a malware objective that's maybe not common, but it's relatively new, and you've probably read about it. It's also an example of something that wasn't on the list because there's a new way to make money that some people came up with between the last time I gave this class and now. But really common objectives is download a program to run on the system. It's kind of similar to what I was talking about with Microsoft Office, VirtualBasic macro, right? Microsoft Office has the ability to actually, in its VirtualBasic script, you can have it so that it'll run little, functions for you. So you can have it so that if you click a button, then it'll calculate the value that's in a bunch of different columns and then put a summary of whatever algorithm you're trying to run on it in another column, right? You can also use that same VirtualBasic script to download a program from the internet and then run it on the local system. And a lot of hardware vendors, like people selling machinery and stuff like that, that functionality is actually very popular for them to use when they... I have no idea what that was. I will say that if you aren't speaking, might be helpful to mute the mic because it sounded extremely, it sounded like something fell down upstairs. Anyway, if you are using the VirtualBasic macros like that, a lot of manufacturers of machinery will actually ship new driver files and stuff like that through a means like this, where they give you instructions. They'll have a button you click on there, and that actually downloads and runs the file, and it typically prompts you and everything. Hackers use the same mechanism to try and get malware on your system as well. And the device being used for that, the Visual Basic script itself, is actually something I would consider malware. Delete files, so many of you have probably seen a lot of the ransomware, and also just some of the destructive stuff that's out there. So the WannaCry malware that was really big in the news last year was an example of something that destroyed files. So those of you who aren't aware, it was classified as ransomware, but it turned out that there was no functionality in there for actually creating a reversible operation. It basically just overwrote whatever files that it claimed to encrypt with junk data. So deleting or destroying files is a popular thing. There were some other malware that was found targeting South Korean banking industry and stuff like that at one point that literally would just try and wipe their hard drives. It was called the wiper malware. Real creative name there. So encrypt and delete files, that's the more traditional ransomware that you'll see. Remote access is a popular one. So many of you have probably used like VNC or remote desktop, or maybe even TeamViewer is a real popular one in a enterprise context. So TeamViewer itself is actually used maliciously, which just kind of complicates the equation a bit, to try and trick people into giving remote access to their computer to somebody who claims to be a customer service professional or something like that. Pranking system users, pranking, trolling, whatever. That's always a very, very popular one as well. Just even if it's just a matter of constantly just popping up a dialog box every 5 minutes or something like that that forces the user to just click OK. That's actually very common. Private information theft, that's a big one, a lot of financial motivation there. And then anonymized attack source. So a real popular and a real financially lucrative mechanism is to try and get access to your system, not for the purpose of actually targeting you, but just reselling your system or selling access to your system to try and attack someone else, and then basically have almost a kind of degree of separation between the architect of the attack or the criminal and the target of the attack. That provides them a lot of times with a sufficient level of anonymity that can prevent the ability for, say, law enforcement to really kind of create a good case against them. So that's one of the reasons why, say, reusing a system that's compromised by trying to get malware on them that just allows them to use your system as an attack source is highly lucrative. So I'll give a disclaimer as well. The class is Malware Analysis. So this is kind of impacts you all multiple ways. You're going to be dealing with software that was supposed to, I won't be dealing with a lot of stuff that was supposed to do any damage per se. Most of the software that you will deal with is stuff that was intended to just provide unauthorized access. If anything, if I do provide access to anything, it'll be stuff that's probably older. So you won't be analyzing a lot of newer or active stuff, as I'd say. And, but there's still the possibility that it could, make changes in the system. So that, to that end, I would recommend using, virtual machine for everything. This is part of the reason why I'll be providing virtual machine images that allow you to analyze malware more or less safely, but just be advised that there's a risk there. Yes?
Will you be talking about various intel space law?
We may. So I will say that I would like to talk about it. So if we do have some time closer to spring break, I might take a class period to talk about that as one of the additional topics. One thing I will say is that the Intel CPU bug doesn't have a lot of malware, doesn't have any malware, to my knowledge, written against it. There's just a lot of proof of concept of how people could leverage that attack to target systems. So from the malware analysis perspective, there's not a whole lot to play with there, although I could make it relevant to the course. So because I will say that the data leakage vulnerability that was discussed in there is relatively novel, and it's actually not too complicated once you get down to the nuts and bolts of what's going on in the branch predictor and the processor. So I'd be more than happy to talk about that. So the other thing too, so this is really two disclaimers here. One of them is basically don't hurt yourself, which, you know, probably you can hurt yourself more in the chemistry lab than you can here. But, you know, just because of that, it's also a good idea to make sure that you're backing your stuff up, which is generally just good practice, even if you're not doing malware analysis. But back your stuff up, because that way, if you do feel that you might have screwed up your own system in ways that are not easily reversible, that you can very easily just erase everything and start from scratch. You know, I will say that if in the event that that does happen, let me know, although I can't promise that I will be big help on trying to clean any problems up. You're also responsible for using the knowledge for academic and research purposes only within the scope of the examples and assignments provided in this class and any research efforts you have here. So you're going to learn about malware samples, you're going to learn about how they're built, you're going to learn about the tools that are used for doing data theft and for doing password theft and stuff like that. Use this knowledge for good purposes, not for bad purposes. I'm not responsible for using it for bad purposes, but if anyone tells me that you are, I am responsible for telling someone else. And that will not be fun for anyone involved. So please don't do the bad thing. So I mentioned earlier, most of the course I put together from my experience. There are a couple of books that I may use from time to time. They're listed here. I won't ever say go read such and such chapter in this book. If I do use any of the information in here, I'll be basically like carving out pieces and then citing the book, stuff like that. Last time I taught the course, I used these books mainly for inspiration. So all the content that I put together by hand. I read the books to try and figure out, say, what topics were useful in focusing on and which topics maybe I, decided not to include for some reason. So they were helpful on like the inspiration side. But if you're interested in getting kind of deeper or learning about specific tools, because I will say that both of these things have very specific tools in them, it's worth going out and getting them. There's another one that's an older book that's also pretty good that I feel covers a handful of topics more in depth. So basically, if you're interested in kind of other sorts of information, just email me, and then I'll get back to you as well with kind of other tips beyond these and beyond what I had in the, down here, the recommended resources. What I'll also do, and sorry for kind of jumping out of the slides, but what I'll also do is, a handful of things have been put together since I last taught this class, and I haven't kept this list updated. So I think this was the last one I put in here, and this is actually a really good resource, I'm told. I haven't gone through all of it. I've gone through a handful of it, and it looks pretty dead on. But I'll continue to add to this as the class goes on. If any of you find something or something that someone put together that's interesting and think that it deserves to be included up here, just email me and I'll be happy to add it. One of the other neat things that I always find cool about malware analysis is it's quickly developing. So we'll just pick, like this, for example. I'll pick this one. So this is like a site where this guy has a whole bunch of analysis tools listed on it. So I'll go in here, and let's see. I'll go down here to debuggers or something. Yeah. This site is, there we go. So he's got a bunch of debuggers down here. that basically allow you to analyze a program while it's executing. This one has been a really popular debugger that a lot of people have been talking about for a very long time. A lot of the books will go into huge depth on this particular debugger. However, one consequence of this debugger is it's a 32-bit only debugger, and it's old. It hasn't been maintained for like 5 to 10 years or something. But a lot of people still talk about it because it's what they learned on. This one is a free debugger as well that's based on the same code that's been further developed, but a lot of people don't write about it because it's part of a, or I should say, it's associated with a commercial tool, and a lot of people just never learned, from the beginning how to use this debugger. This will probably be the one that we use in our Windows instances in class. You won't see it actually highlighted in a lot of the documentation, a lot of the books and everything, but it basically does everything this one does, but also is like actively maintained and everything. That's just one example of, situations where the development that's occurring happens to be going a lot faster than a lot of the folks who are contributing to the community go. So you'll find that just kind of the, development pattern is pretty rapid and chaotic and everything. For that reason, I wouldn't be surprised if maybe 1 or 2 of these get outdated by the end of the year, or at least have some content that's no longer applicable. So, yeah.
Unity debugger?
Yeah.
Is that 64?
Yeah, I believe so. Let me see. I'm pretty sure it's, yeah. I'll get back to you. I think it's 64-bit, but I can look. Let me see. If I go here, and then I go here. Products, Unity debugger. So you can download it here. GUI command line tool, GDB. Let's see if they have anything in here. I won't dive into this for too long unless I will say that most of what we deal with is going to be 32-bit tools, just because that's a lot of what I have. Yeah, all the assembly they list here is 32-bit. I can't imagine that they wouldn't support 64-bit as well with it, but I'll get back to you. So, we will touch on the kind of architectural distinctions between 64 and 32-bit. The assembly language that I do discuss in my slides is all 64-bit, and then I throw in footnotes for the 32-bit stuff, mainly because at this point, I don't really see a point to starting with like 32-bit as the baseline and then trying to add on the 64-bit differences on top of that. It's a lot more beneficial and to everyone to kind of go in reverse, basically explain 64-bit as the base language and then explain what's different about the 32-bit pieces. So, all right, here's the slides. So I divide malware analysis into 2 what I would call largely complementary sides or phases, if you will. So there's static analysis. There's identifying malware through analysis of the contents of an artifact. So if I look at a file, if it's a program or something like that, program has like functions in it. It's got algorithms that were implemented in it. It's got icons and stuff like that might have been put in there because it's a Windows program or an Apple program or something like that. It's got maybe an author is listed on there or a company or file name and all that stuff. But basically, can I identify the malware through analysis of what it looks like, or visual characteristics, or structural characteristics, that type of thing. So if I'm given a drive that just has a whole bunch of suspicious files on it, would I be able to use that information without opening every single file and testing it to actually try and categorize the malware? So then the other side is dynamic analysis. It's identifying malware and classifying it through analysis of system effects. That's what I like to call system effects produced by loading or running an artifact in a contained environment. So how does it behave? And I have like the good example of like how the cat behaves. You tell it's a cat because it knocked anything full of water on the floor. Like this is actually a great example. If I had a cat and I happened to leave a glass in the room, or if someone else happened to leave a glass in the room, and then I came in maybe a day later or something, saw it knocked on the floor and shattered, there might be evidence that a cat was there even if I never actually saw the physical cat. So malware works this way too a lot of times, because a lot of attackers like to clean up after themselves, like to try and conceal their steps, cover up their breadcrumbs, etc. Because the goal of any attacker is trying to remain embedded within an environment undetected for long periods of time, or just for as long as possible. If you're the actor who's trying to steal data, like say super secret manufacturing diagrams from a large company or something like that, typically you don't know where those are stored the moment you get in. The moment you get in is the moment you get to start exploring inside the network and explore the kind of unexplored like frontier of the network, figure out where do they like to store their sensitive data, how do I get to that, build up those plans. In order to do that, you don't want your attack to be obvious. So a lot of times when we're dealing with analyzing malware, we're also trying to describe what effects it had, what the behaviors were, so that then if we have people who happen to be investigating activity that was suspicious happening on 20 computers, we might actually be able to use that information to try and tell us what malware was used just based upon various system level changes that occurred without actually having a piece of that malware. Also, knowing these two pieces gives us the ability to do kind of comprehensive examination for whatever malware that we're looking for. So from our perspective, the goal is that, for instance, static analysis can tell us what the malware looks like and how to find the malware, even if the malware is not running, if it's dormant, or if it never succeeded to run for some reason, if the attack was maybe halfway successful, something like that, and there was some junk left behind. Dynamic analysis can tell us that if the attack was really good and they cleaned up after themselves, maybe give us some insight on how to look for it based upon, say, side effects. So we'll focus on applying techniques and concepts learned in this to those homework assignments that I talked about. So for most of the homework assignments, the approach to them is generally going to be that you'll be presented with some objective, you'll be responsible for finding some sort of attributes about a piece of unknown code or an unknown artifact or something like that, or maybe even looking through what I would call a haystack almost, to try and find malware in the haystack that maybe is similar to something else. You'll be responsible for doing the investigation and then also writing up a lab report to go along with that may or may not include like screen caps and things like that. But you'll be responsible for putting some narrative in there, trying to explain, say, what you did, what you found, what you conclude from that, and then using that to go and find the next thing by doing something. So what you did, what you found, what you conclude. So generally, you'll be putting that stuff, you'll be putting together reports that'll be, multiple pages that'll do that type of stuff, or that'll be described in that type of way. I give a kind of short list here of the tools that are worth investigating to try and educate yourselves. All of these are freely available to anyone who's enrolled at UC, and generally freely available to everyone. So the only one that's generally, or that maybe sometimes is iffy, is this one. So in addition to the modern.ie website that I showed everyone earlier, some of you might not be familiar with it, that you all have a free DreamSpark subscription. So you can get at least a number of versions of Windows 10 off of that DreamSpark site. And that's part of your UC, student IT fee. So that nice big fee that's on your student bill every year or every semester. A chunk of that's going in to fund the subscription that we have to DreamSpark that gives you access to, Microsoft Windows and a whole bunch of Microsoft Visual Studio and a whole bunch of things. So if you aren't aware of that, you are now. That's also another place that allows you to get at least like 1 or 2 versions of Windows that don't expire after 90 days. And I believe you can actually get the enterprise version of Windows, except they call it like the education version or something like that. So become familiar with all of these. So I primarily use Linux as my primary operating system. I would recommend coming up to speed in that yourselves. The version of, or I should say the analysis VM that I'm going to provide to all of you, the Kali Linux VM, is of course a Linux distribution, has a bunch of Linux tools on it. You can install them in Windows. I have not tried installing any of them in Windows. So like Metasploit's a really popular penetration testing tool that you will use for part of the class. I've never installed Metasploit on Windows. It may work, it may not. It's a Ruby program. I also have no idea how any of this stuff's going to interact with AV, antivirus, on your computer. So it may work fine. It may cause it to complain. I don't know. But what you'll want to do is, if you decide to go down a certain path that deviates from just using Kali Linux in the VM, you may want to give yourself a head start to try and overcome any problems that might create. So I'll also make sure that this list makes it up in Blackboard as well, and then I'll add extra stuff to it. I think last semester we also did some document analysis and stuff like that, and I do have that on the schedule again for this semester. So I may have some document analyzers to put in here too. So this is tentative schedule. So week 10 is spring break, which I believe is March 19th or something, or March 12th. Okay. What's that? 12th. Yeah. So it's the week that begins March 12th. No class that week. I will also add that there will be a handful of days, maybe 2 or something, that I have to attend a conference out of town, so I won't be here for this class. And for that, what I won't have class in the room in that case. I'll let you know ahead of time, and then I'll have some research assignment or something like that you'll do, and probably involves watching one of the videos and then also maybe commenting on the content in there in lieu of actually having an in-class session. So just for my employer, I'm often taken out to DC to give talks, and other meetings. So that said, I have been working with the schedule to try and keep it minimal. So I think probably maybe 2 classes might be at risk because of that, and I'll make sure I get those to you ahead of time. So let me see. And I'll just run through this. We actually do have I believe. Let's see, what time is it? So we have about 20 minutes left. So I have enough to kind of go through some of this stuff. So this will be, I'm going to limit the class intro to today. I'm going to try and get the next class I give literally going to be me going through VirtualBox, and I'll try and keep like the slide content to a minimum. Much of it's going to be exploring some of the features in it. If you want to, say, jump on that ahead of time, the most important features to that are the virtual networking options. That's the one I found that people generally have the most difficulty with, is getting the virtual networking in VirtualBox to do what you need it to do. There's really 3 options that are going to matter for this class. NAT gives you access to the internet, and then internal network and host-only network give you, what do you call it, separated or firewalled access, prevent your VM from talking to the internet or talking to other machines on your network. When you're working with running malware inside your VM, the most important thing is that VM cannot talk to anyone else. So internal or host only will keep you from that. And this will be in the slides and in the material when I talk about that stuff. But just to let you all know ahead of time that the networking piece, understanding it and getting it right, is going to be critical. Next week, we'll actually put together example cyber attacks that involve putting an attack probably into a PDF file. It'll be very similar to what I have in last semester or last year's videos. I'll probably vary it up a bit from what I put in those videos because I did skip over a handful of things I wanted to do. But we'll actually do the attack on Tuesday, and then we'll actually break it down very quickly the following Thursday. So just to kind of give an idea of what the outcomes of doing malware analysis, what you're expecting the outcomes to look like. And so I'll actually have some discussion that's kind of a little bit more academic, that's on classification and meaning and terminology and taxonomy and stuff like that. I find that's actually one of the big kind of areas that's lacking in this field. So I do end up spending a lot of time on it, trying to explain it and trying to kind of communicate to you a language that we'll all use. Do static executable analysis. So this is actually analyzing an executable program, and the assembly language crash course. Following that, I think I actually have this one updated here a little bit. Let me just bring this up. Yeah, actually, what I'll do, so you can see, I was actually kind of debating with myself on how to break this up. I actually moved this piece up a lot earlier, this static analysis with Yara. So I'm actually going to try and move this up as early as possible in the class so that I can incorporate it into a lot more of the projects. And so this tool will be very useful on trying to put together like basically detection patterns and some analysis work and things like that. So this is a analysis language almost that you'll get to use. It's kind of like a domain-specific language if you're familiar with that concept. So I'll go, assembly language. I like to break these two things up. A lot of people will try and cram data structures or reverse engineering of data structures into the assembly language piece. I like to break them up because, well, number one, for the most part, there's no real architecture-specific concept for data structures. So data structures only work the way they do and are only organized the way they are because the underlying libraries you're using just decided, sometimes arbitrarily, sometimes for well-informed reasons, to do it that way. But very few and far between is there actually a tie-back that requires them to be done that way because that was actually embedded in the processor architecture. So the processor architecture really just focuses on algorithm implementation and stuff like that. So how steps are done and what operations you have to do those steps. So for instance, depending on the depending on the diversity of operations that you have in your CPU, you can either do a step with one command or it might take you writing 15 commands to do the same, the same step, the same algorithm. So it all depends on the architecture. We'll focus exclusively on this, at least for most of the class. One of the things that I didn't touch on in the last class, which I would like to incorporate into this one, is analysis of machine or bytecode languages that aren't x86 or AMD64. Because in my experience, I've been seeing a lot more of those. So I'd like to share that knowledge with you guys. That probably means that for document analysis, rather than spending 2 weeks on that, we'll probably try and compress it all into 1 week. Another big thing that comes into play with malware is obfuscation and exploit. So it's obfuscation is literally, can you make the code look like it's doing one thing when in fact it's doing something else? Or can you even just arbitrarily confuse the analyzer or the analyst as to what the ultimate purpose of a piece of code is? One of the things I have listed in week 12 here, this is kind of the schedule that I followed last year. I might end up moving this up as well, is dynamic analysis overview, which is basically from here on up. Like, most of those topics can actually be done without a Windows VM. You're dealing with software analyzing malware that is not actually executing. It's not until here that you end up getting to that execution time frame. So what I'm actually considering doing is moving this one up to right under here, and then and starting with these. The flow worked well before, but this doesn't leave us a lot of time for you all to experiment with that unless you decide to jump ahead. So that's the only reason why I'm talking about moving it up. I guess the underlying thing here is don't be surprised if I decide. I'll definitely let you know well ahead of time, but don't be surprised if I decide to move something up. Because then this is where you start getting into using a Unity debugger and stuff like that, and then GDB, the GNU debugger, in order to do analysis. And then additional topics, which could be like analyzing malware that's written in Java bytecode, or analyzing malware that's written in MSIL or something like that, or even maybe something written in ARM for a Android malware or something. So the scoring rubric. I will say that the last semester I taught this, I had a lot of no-show during the in-class period, and as a result, some folks had trouble with some of the projects later on. I'm gonna put together some aspect of participation, although I'm not going to give like a huge structure around that ahead of time. I basically have like some participation which may consist of these things. I will also say that like this is a graduate level class, so the 100 to 92, 92 to 84, or whatever like that kind of grading schedule is not going to apply here the way it does in like an undergrad course for me or an undergrad. The grading is going to basically be kind of differentiating students. But I will say I will have some sort of participation. It'll be unannounced. It won't be weekly, but it won't be. There will be more than 4 of them. So, and I'll just kind of come up with that as it goes. Things like what I was talking about, where I'm not present, but I kind of give a kind of viewing or reading assignment or something like that. And then you're required to go and discuss something in the forum. That type of thing would be would contribute to participation. 70% of the grade is going to be the 8 project assignments. That's going to be the big one, where if you're keeping up with the project assignments, You get about 2 weeks for each. You know, I'll accept late work, you know, up to 48 hours after the closing of the homework thing at a reduced rate. And then the final will be a lab project, so it'll be a very similar format. It'll just be comprehensive. So each one of these project assignments is going to probably touch on maybe one or at most two of the topics that we cover around the time that they're assigned. The final project will basically cover all the knowledge or a large amount of the knowledge, like at least, say, 70% of the knowledge since the beginning of class. So you'll be responsible for running through the full, you know, beginning to end analysis. You'll be responsible for doing both dynamic and static analysis. You'll be responsible for collecting basically all the data points and doing all the types of documentation you did for the others. So you can almost consider the 8 project assignments to be almost mini practice for, you know, the final project. And the final project will basically be to almost replay that or replay some of those for a final attack that is not revealed until the, you know, end of class. I'll definitely keep it so that it's small enough so that, you know, you can get it done in the time necessary. But, you know, that's going to be the goal, is to test you on